Well, hello, Mom and Dad. Wow, what's it been? Almost a year and a half now? Maybe a little more since we last spoke. Pretty soon, I'm going to be leaving the area, and that's why I'm making this video here. I'm going to be going away, moving out of state. Not sure exactly how far I'm going to go, but it'll be far enough that there's a good chance we will never see each other again. We'll certainly never just bump into each other again. So I thought it would be appropriate at this time to make a little video for you. Say one last goodbye, send you one last little message. Now, this isn't the way I wanted it to be. I didn't want our family to end up like this, but it's not really my decision that we're not speaking. Anyway, I don't want anyone to hurt. I don't want any pain. I don't want suffering. I don't know. I still consider myself to be your son. I still consider us to be a family. And as such, I hope that there's enough room in that relationship for one last message, which I hope this video will suffice for. I just ask that you watch this video with an open mind. I'm not going to throw any apostate material at you. I'm not going to try to convert you to atheism. All I'm going to do is just present some of the society's own information and a little bit of newspaper articles and some other publicly available stuff that you can look up on your own. I'm going to provide citations, no secrets, no mysteries here. Just watch. It's all very well documented. Got a few things I want to talk about, so let's just go in chronological order. Take a look at the Proclaimer's book if you have it handy there, page 425, paragraph 5 under the heading An Intriguing Subject. It says, "What an exciting message they proclaimed. Millions now living will never die. Brother Rutherford had given a discourse on this subject in 1918. It was also the title of a 128-page booklet published in 1920. From 1920 through 1925, that same subject was featured again and again around the world in public meetings in all areas where speakers were available and in upwards of 30 languages." Now, that's just a brief blurb, and that Millions Now Living document is not, Millions Now Living Will Never Die document is not really referenced very much in the Society's modern publications, but you could then be forgiven for thinking that it wasn't very consequential, wasn't important, wasn't taken very seriously. But on the contrary, this was something that those Bible students took very seriously, and indeed quite literally. I want you to take a look at this here. I'll put up on the screen here. It's one newspaper advertisement that was taken out to advertise those public meetings that the Proclaimer's book talks about. There's many more. I have copies of at least 25 different ads that were taken out for this same purpose. But this one happens to be from the Oakland Tribune, February 18th, 1921. I don't know if you can read this or not, but I hope you believe that I'm reading it accurately quoting from this newspaper. The subheading at the top there says, "In a free lecture in the Auditorium Theater Sunday afternoon, it will be conclusively proven by many Bible prophecies which have been fulfilled during the past 4 years, and from many others still in course of fulfillment, that thousands living in this city will never die." Now take a look down at the bottom at that quote there. It's taken, or was said by none other than Geoffrey Rutherford himself. It says, "I want the statement 'millions now living will never die' to be taken literally, as it is, in the light of recently fulfilled prophecy, a provable biblical proposition." Have you seen this 128-page booklet, "Millions Now Living Will Never Die"? I have. And I'll admit I haven't read the whole thing. It's actually pretty dry and pretty crazy, to be honest with you. But let me ask you this. That provable biblical proposition that was made to those who were alive in 1920, that they would never die, how many of them do you think are still alive and kicking? Well, probably none of them. They're almost certainly all dead. So how is that provable biblical proposition working out? I'll let you decide that one. But try to put yourself in the shoes of someone who attended those meetings, who got those newspaper advertisements, who believed this message and who decided that yes, this is the truth. I want to be a part of that group that never dies. What do I have to do to join you guys, to join this group, to be a part of that group that's not going to die? What did they lose? What did they give up? What family did they abandon? Jobs, businesses, careers, so on and so forth. And for what? Well, let's just be charitable and call it a broken promise. They were promised they would never die, and they're dead. Next thing I want to touch on is from the May 22nd, 1969 Awake, page 15. And you guys might actually remember this one. It says there, put it up on the screen again, if you are a young person, you also need to face the fact that you will never grow old in this present system of things. Why not? Because all the evidence and fulfillment of Bible prophecy indicates that this corrupt system is due to end in a few years. Of the generation that observed the beginning of the last days in 1914, Jesus foretold, "This generation will by no means pass away until all these things occur." Therefore, as a young person, you will never fulfill any career that this system offers. If you are in high school and thinking about a college education, it means at least 4, perhaps even 6 or 8 more years to graduate into a specialized career. But where will this system of things be by that time? It will be well on the way toward its finish, if not actually gone. Now, when this Awake was published in 1969, you guys probably weren't old enough to really make an informed decision on its contents and really mold your lives or make concrete moves based on this counsel, but your parents were, and that was really who this was targeted towards anyway. So now, 47 years later, where are we? Well, contrary to this system of things actually being gone, you could have gone to college, started a career, and now be looking at finishing it. Second generation, me, my sister, we could have gone to college and be well established in our careers. Your grandkids, third generation, could now be looking at going to college, getting a real education, and something that will set them up for the rest of their lives. Now, this promised generation is getting ready to be late by how many generations? The promised end, late by how many generations? Well, I count 3. You, me, and your grandkids. 3 generations that are getting ready to squander their potential based on these promises that just keep getting pushed back. And it's no secret that the witness stand on education hasn't softened. If anything, they've really doubled down on it in recent years, it seems to me. When I was coming of age, thinking about what to do with the rest of my life, education was repeatedly condemned, and we were advised not to, in short. But at the same time, that counsel was being directed towards me and my peers. This was happening, and it's from the January 2015 JW Broadcasting.
Speaking of lawyers, we have an interesting perspective from Brother Philip Brumley of the legal department. Let's go to our Patterson studio and listen to an interview of him conducted by Brother David Schaefer, a helper to the teaching committee.
Thank you very much, Brother Morris. And we're delighted to have with us Brother Philip Brumley, overseer of the legal department. He's been a full-time servant for the past 41 years, and for the last 28 years has been overseer of the legal department. Brother Brumley, thank you very much for taking the time to be with us today. I know you have a very busy schedule.
My pleasure.
How did it come about that you came to work in the legal department?
So I was working in the carpenter shop one day, and I got a telephone call from Brother Charles Steele. The governing body asked Brother Steele who could go through law school to become an attorney. The organization needed a few attorneys to help defend the rights of Jehovah's Witnesses. So Brother Steele asked me, or basically gave me the assignment, we want you to become a lawyer.
So the organization made a decision to send you through law school.
Wow. So the organization made a decision to send you through law school. Wow. The same people who prohibited us, you and me, our peers and our families from getting a real education and realizing our potentials, actually approved of and paid for the advanced degrees of some Bethel elites. Do you think that's right? Do you think that's fair? I'm not even sure it's defensible. And I'm familiar with all the rationalizations against higher education. There's no surprises in witness literature to me. And I know why people would be able to rationalize this away and say, well, this is a wonderful provision for Jehovah's organization. But the fact is that the organization saw a need to plan for their future. And at the same time, they sabotaged your future. They sabotaged my future. And they're doing the same to your grandkids' future. All I can take from this is that apparently the end of this system isn't as close as it is for some as it is for others. You know, time should flow the same for everybody, but apparently it doesn't. I'll never get the chance to find out what might have been. And Dad, I bet deep down you feel the same way. I was thinking about this the other day. We worked together for a long time in the same office there. And I bet you would have dearly loved to have had those little letters after your name, so it was official. And they stole that from you. Something to think about. Alright, next thing I want to talk about is from the May 15th, 1984 Watchtower. And I bet you guys remember this, and I want to say that I do too. I was pretty young at the time, but this is pretty profound. Take a look at this Watchtower cover here. From the 84 Watchtower, May 15th, page 5. 1914, the generation that will not pass away. That says, if Jesus used generation in that sense and we apply it to 1914, then the babies of that generation are now 70 years old or older, and others alive in 1914 are in their 80s or 90s, a few even having reached 100. There are still many millions of that generation alive. Some of them will by no means pass away until all things occur. And then there's a 1988 Awake, just a few years later, April 8th, page 14. The last days, what's next? Another relevant quote here that says, likewise today most of the generation of 1914 has passed away. However, there are still millions on earth who were born in that year or prior to it. And although their numbers are dwindling, Jesus' words will come true. This generation will certainly not pass away until all these things have happened. This is yet another reason for believing that Jehovah's thief-like day is imminent. Now, I was raised believing that this was the ironclad, no excuses, literal truth of those who were old enough to see the events of 1914 start to unfold. Some, probably not many, but some would still be alive when the end of this system of things occurred. They would probably be old and decrepit, but they would still be here. End of story. No caveats, no excuses. That was the end, or that was going to happen before the end of the system of things. Those people would still be alive. Now that Watchtower cover that I showed a couple of minutes ago, with all those people on it, how many of them do you think are still alive? Well, I'll save you the trouble. None of them. They're all dead. Last one died in 2008. So by the most conservative definition, the 1914 generation is 102 years old now. And essentially gone. I don't think that you could stretch that 1914 generation out any further, according to that understanding from that 84 Watchtower. But that's really not a problem, because now we have this from the September 2015 JW Broadcasting.
Would you like an easy way to keep the generation straight? An easy way is to consider the situation of Brother Fred W. Franz. Now, you'll see that he's FWF on the chart. Now, as we said before, Brother Franz was born in 1893. He was baptized in November of 1913. So, as one of the Lord's anointed in 1914, he saw the sign and he understood what the sign meant. Now, Brother Franz lived a long life. He finished his earthly course at 99 years of age in 1992. Now, do you know of many who were of the anointed in 1914 and who outlived Brother Franz? There may have been some, but not many. Now, just for the sake of argument, suppose that we assume that Brother Franz was the last of that first group of anointed ones. That is, the group of anointed ones who were anointed in 1914, who saw the sign, and then continued serving faithfully. Now, we're not saying Brother Franz was. We just don't know. But for the sake of argument, let's suppose. In order to be part of this generation, someone would have had to have been anointed before 1992, because he would have to have been a contemporary of some of the first group. Now, again, we're not saying that Brother Franz was the last of this group, but we're just using this for the sake of argument as a point of reference. Anyone anointed after 1992 would be of the anointed, but he would not be part of this generation. And Jesus said, this generation will not pass away until all these things happen. Are you beginning to see how this all connects with the urgency of our times?
Wow, what can you really say about this? The only real scriptural evidence that they give for this overlapping generation is a reference to Exodus 1:6, and this is just from a few minutes earlier in that same broadcast.
But of course we have to know, what is a generation? And which particular generation was Jesus talking about? Now, if you were asked by someone to identify a scripture that tells us what a generation is, what scripture would you turn to? I'll give you a moment. Think about that. My choice is Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6. Let's read that. Exodus chapter 1 and verse 6. It says, Joseph eventually died, and also all his brothers, and all that generation.
What scripture do you think of when trying to define a generation? Well, since he asked, I'll give you my answer to that question. And this one's pretty straightforward. You don't even have to leave Matthew. Let's look at Matthew 1. We'll just look at 1, 2, and 17. The book of the history of Jesus Christ, son of David, son of Abraham. Abraham became father to Isaac. Isaac became father to Jacob. Jacob became father to Judah and his brothers, so on and so forth, until you get to verse 17. All the generations then from Abraham until David were 14 generations. From David until the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations. From the deportation to Babylon until the Christ, 14 generations. So why would Splain have to go all the way back to Exodus to try to explain what a generation is, and really tenuously at that, shoehorn it into this overlapping generations business here? I don't know, but I'm sure that if you can allow yourself one moment of free thought, you'll agree that this overlapping generation business just doesn't make any sense at all. But here we are again. We were promised, mind you, that the end of this system of things would come within the lifetime of this 1914 generation. I remember as a kid, each year the new yearbook would come out, and we'd go and we'd look at the charts. The number of memorial partakers, it went down again. It's going down, down, down. Boy, there's only a couple thousand left. The end of this system of things has got to be close. Just a few thousand last year. Oh boy, here comes the end. We're ready. But eventually, what happened? It started to look like that literal generation was going to all be dead before anything happened. So then when that happened, we get this adjustment. And this overlapping generations adjustment now means that the end of this system of things could be off 100 years more into the future. We don't know. Whatever. Long time. They can keep moving it. And why, I would ask, has the number of memorial partakers nearly doubled since 2005? That goes absolutely contrary to everything I ever learned about what this generation meant and what it meant for the end of this system of things. Please, just think about it. Another broken promise. Another stretched out end of this system of things. Alright, now the last thing that I want to talk about is a little different. I'm going to switch gears here a little bit. Dad, you might remember that some of the last serious conversations we had before I left had to do with how the witnesses handled cases of and allegations of child abuse. And at the time, I knew things didn't feel quite right, but I really hadn't come to understand just how bad it is. And before you dismiss what I have to say here, I would ask that you just pause for a second and think about how the cases that you have, or at least now have personal knowledge of, were handled. Maybe those weren't isolated cases. Perhaps this is a systemic problem within the witnesses. Anyway, have you ever heard of the Australian Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse? It's kind of a mouthful, but it's really self-explanatory. The Australian government is looking into and investigating how many organizations handle child abuse and allegations thereof within their ranks. At last count, they looked into about 40 different organizations, secular, religious, lots of different organizations, and the witnesses are among them. I'll provide some links to their findings and their official website in the description of this video. But according to the 2015 yearbook, there are 788 congregations in Australia. Now, this Royal Commission obtained the witnesses' official records of child abusers within the organization in Australia. These are the witnesses' own records, mind you, that were provided to this Royal Commission. In those 788 congregations, care to guess how many files the witnesses themselves have on child abusers within their congregations? 788 congregations, 1,006 abusers. That's not individual cases, that's individual abusers. So, who knows how high the number of actual abuse cases are. Number it is. You and I both know that people like this don't just abuse one time. They don't offend one time. So it could be 2,000, 5,000, 10,000 cases of abuse. We just don't know. But here's the kicker. I want you to take a guess at how many of these abusers were ever reported to the police as a result of the congregation gaining knowledge of their activities. Would you say maybe 80% of them were reported to police? 50%? Not great. 20%? That's even worse. It's kind of embarrassing. Nope. 0. Not one. Not a single one of these abusers was ever reported to the police. Let that sink in for a minute. Now, the Royal Commission, they called governing body member Geoffrey Jackson to testify on this matter. And amazingly enough, he did. I was really surprised that he didn't try to duck out of it some way. I'll provide a link in the description as well to his testimony, because you really should watch it. But if you watch that video, his testimony, it's pretty extensive. And if you think that he's really proud of the witness record, on this matter, and he's boldly defending the witnesses, you're not watching the same video I am, because it's really quite embarrassing to watch. Just watch it. That's all I'll say about that. But I really shouldn't have to say too much more about this. Dad, you've had a front row seat to the aftermath of how these kind of cases often get handled. You know that the witness policies are insufficient to protect children. Does the two-witness rule ring any bells? I know you probably don't technically call it that, but you know what I'm talking about. I don't really have any more words for this one. It's just disgusting. Anyway, let's wrap this up here. I wanted to find some big, moving, grand conclusion to this whole presentation here, but I think really the evidence and the facts speak for themselves. Millions now living will never die? Come on. That generation made unknowable sacrifices because they were promised they would never die and that they would live forever. And they're all dead. Who should we hold accountable for that? And keep in mind, this message was widely proclaimed after 1919, which was the year that Jesus supposedly inspected the witnesses and chose them as his chosen people, his conduit for truth. And what about higher education? Think about you, me, all our peers. You can probably include my grandparents in this one, and certainly your grandchildren. We were all promised that we didn't need to get an education, that we didn't need to go on past high school, because the world was ending. It was a waste of time and dangerous. That promise that was made to you in black and white was broken. And I see no reason to believe that it's going to play out any differently for me or for your grandchildren. Who do we hold accountable for these broken promises and wasted potential? And the overlapping generation? Let's be real. It doesn't make any sense at all. Here's a challenge. Rewatch that whole JW Broadcasting episode with Splain in it. And I want you to pay attention how many times he conflates generation and contemporary. Unfortunately, they're not remotely the same thing. But it makes for a nice JW Broadcasting episode. Even the governing body can't convincingly explain this one from the scriptures. But it's a really handy way to put the end of the system of things off another 50, 60, 100 years. Dad, I hope you think honestly about past events that occurred in the congregation that you are now a part of, and this Australian Royal Commission, and how this issue of child abuse has affected our families. If you can say with a straight face that you truly believe that the witness rules and policies are sufficient to protect children from sexual predators that may want to prey on them, I'm just really disappointed if that's the case. That's all I can say about that. How many generations of witnesses have come and gone, each having been promised in some shape or form that the end of this system of things was coming within their lifetimes? Quite a few, for a long time now. How many witnesses have laid on their deathbeds, perhaps dying of nothing more profound than old age, wondering just what went wrong? Where is the end of this system of things that I was promised that I would see? My great-grandparents' generation surely died that way. And sadly, my grandparents' generation has started to as well. And hopefully it will be a long time, but eventually you guys will find yourselves in that same situation. I'm going to die someday. Your grandchildren and their grandchildren are going to die someday. I don't know. I hope it doesn't take that long for you to realize that something's fishy here. Something is not right. But if that day comes and you have that epiphany, just remember where you heard it first. Dad, when I visited your home for that last time that night, you remember the offer that I made to you? I do. I said that if you could prove to me that God exists without using the Bible, I would return to the witnesses. And to me, that seems like a logical place to start. If you were going to mold your life around an ideology like the one that the witnesses offer, you should really begin at the beginning with proving that God exists. Now, I didn't expect you to do it that night. I expected you to take some time to think about it. But what happened after that? We exchanged a few emails, went back and forth just a little bit, not really any about this. And in the end, you told me that you really weren't even going to try. You weren't even going to try to convince me of this most foundational belief. Now, you said at the time that that was because I'd already made up my mind. And first of all, no, I haven't. I haven't made up my mind. I'm not going to deny that it would take some extraordinary evidence to convince me of God's existence, but I am now and will always remain open to any evidence that you can present to me. And secondly, perhaps more profoundly here, I was more than a little saddened that you wouldn't even make an attempt. If I was a random person at the door who was showing that level of interest, saying, prove this one thing to me and yes, I will become a witness, you would return week after week, spare no effort to get me into the truth. But what of your only son? A few emails and zero effort. Now, I'm not ignorant. I've been around long enough to know why you handled it that way. But I can't help but wonder that if you really believed that you had the truth, and you really believed that my life was hanging in the balance, why would you discard me so readily? Just think about it. Now, whatever you think of me in this video at this point, which is probably not much if you've made it this far, honestly, I'm not trying to convince you to believe or to leave the witnesses. You guys, you believe what you want to believe. That's everyone's fundamental human right. But I just want you to ask yourselves if it's ever appropriate to question what you've been taught. If someone has been this wrong this many times about such serious matters, do you think perhaps that they might be wrong about anything else? And I'll be honest, the one that has the greatest effect on me right now is the shunning policy. Discarding your one and only son on the basis of the teaching that someone who doesn't have a great track record. Anyway, you know what I'm trying to say. They've been wrong plenty of times. Perhaps they're wrong about this. Like I said, before too long, I'm going to be leaving the area. And there's a good chance that we'll never see each other again. It's not the way I want it to be, but that's the way it's going to have to be as long as you guys still believe what you believe. They say witnesses don't tear apart families, but I think this is evidence to the contrary. If you guys change your mind, you'll know how to reach me. I'm going to keep my old email address. I check it all the time. It's available. Whatever you believe about me, know this. I do love you, and I wish we could be a family again. It's just up to you.